I'm honoured to be moderating this discussion. My name, again, is Cynthia Scherras. I'm the founding editor of Yoke magazine. It's an Australian indie print magazine that aims to nourish our mind, heart and soul. It's a small vehicle of consciousness and creativity for much needed change in the world. So please do share your questions if you haven't already. We'll aim to get to all of them, but as Ayya has pointed out, we will continue the conversation on the Facebook page. So we're happy to be answering any questions there. And as you know, our last day is tomorrow. So if you haven't registered already, please do. And donations are certainly appreciated, as much or as little as you can. The link is in the chat box. And before I begin, I would just like to please welcome in our speakers. I'd also like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians and ancestors of the land of Gadigal country, on where I sit with you all tonight and where Yoke is produced in Sydney, Australia. And I wish to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and further acknowledge the important role that Indigenous people around the world continue to play within our communities. Indigenous cultures and heritage all over the world is still important to Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people in educating all people on this globe, our home, which we all share and live in together. And so wherever you are in the world, where it has always been Indigenous lands, maybe you can acknowledge your people's land and their ancestors that you're sitting on and with right now. So welcome again to the Festival of Radical Awakening, founded by the marvellous, venerable Ayya Yeshe, who we thank again and acknowledge for bringing us all here together for deeper conversation and community. And let me introduce our guest speakers for this Q&A session of day 2. Dr. Vimalasara Valerie Mason-John, who you just heard speak on addiction recovery and liberation. Vimalasara is a public speaker and a master trainer in the field of conflict, transformation, leadership and mindfulness. She is the author of 8 books and the co-founder of 8-Step Recovery, which is an alternative to the 12-step program for addiction. We also welcome Sensei Mayake Caine Barrett Shonen, who was speaking just now on the time to act is now. Mayake Shonen is the current bishop of Nichiren Order of the North American, called also Nona. She has been a Buddhist practitioner for over 50 years, as well as a religious science practitioner for the last 13. She's the president priest of guiding teacher of the Nichiren Buddhist Sangha of Texas, the Maikenji Temple, and hopefully celebrated as she is the first Westerner woman and first person of African-Japanese descent to be ordained in the Nichiren Shu tradition, as well as the first female bishop in Nona. Niken Shoshin is also engaged in spreading the Dharma behind bars at Texas Department of Criminal Justice, as well as supporting the healing of emotional issues of military service with Vets Journey Home. She's certainly active in facilitating training and dialogue on diversity and cross-cultural conflict resolution. She's also active in interfaith and intrafaith dialogue. Welcome. And last but not least, the remarkable venerable Ayya Yeshe, who has shared her wisdom on justice, gender, equality, and reclaiming the sacred feminine. Ayya Yeshe is a Buddhist nun for over 19 years. She's international Buddhist teacher, socially engaged, humanitarian and contemplative. Ayya has lived and worked with untouchable Indian Buddhists for 10 years and is the director of Bodhicitta Foundation. She's working to empower women and children in this community. And Ayya is also the abbess of Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery, Australia, which is a new project. And welcome to you all for being here today. Thank you. It's a little bit strange because I can kind of see, I can't see you all with my screen, so forgive me, but I want to welcome you all, and I thought maybe I could start by asking you all a question before we head to our chat box for more guests to ask. But I wonder how you all think the role of contemplative and spiritual leadership has changed over time and what it looks like in the 21st century. Who's going to go first? Ayya, shall you go first in that one?
How about we invite the elders to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, Miyoki Sensei, would you like to go first? Oh, hang on, we're just unmuting you. Hang on. Oh yeah.
Wait.
Yeah,
I'm
now
sorry.
You're on.
I think more women, that we're going to see more women. And in particular, women of color, Black African descended women. We have a lot to say, and we have a lot to share, and it's our time. You can't deny that. When you look at what's happening in the world, the most successful leaders in any venue are women, because I think we're prepared for the change. We're ready for it. And come hell or high water, let's go, basically.
Before I answer that question, I just want to say that myself working in the Dalit Buddhist community, that we don't use the word untouchable anymore. It's really offensive. So I just really wanted to just put that out there so that we don't go off and start using that term. Which completely transformed my life. I don't know about you, Ayya, but I think I remember coming back thinking, I came back to the West with less complaint after working in the community. It's a really good, it's a great question. I've actually, my morning began with I'm a senior teacher in the Triratna Buddhist community. And my morning began moderating. I've curated 3 courageous conversations about race. And the first one was with all Black Indigenous people of color, order members in my tradition. And then I went from that to a Darkani, co-leading a Darkani retreat. And now I'm here. I managed to have a swim in the ocean. And so how is it going to change? One of the reasons why I think it's time for us, those of us who identify, those people who identify as women or who are female presenting, I'm non-binary female presenting, is because something that has really sabotaged our male teachers is the pull of the fetter of sense desire. You know, when we think of the fetters and the 4th and 5th fetters, ill will and sense desire are really strong gravitational pulls. And if we look out there, there are teachers who we've respected, who have a level of attainment, but they have completely been sabotaged by that fetter. And that's why it's our time, because I'm not saying that we, you know, those of us who identify as women presenting or non-binary don't get pulled by that, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
And this is why. I mean, I know in the Siddha Yoga tradition, I know that who is it? It's the woman who's in charge of that tradition, but she wasn't initially. It was the brother and sister, and they did it because they knew the brother would mess up, but culturally they couldn't put the woman there first. So, you know, it really is our time. And also I want to say is that sitting in the hub of the West, in Canada, North America, who brought Buddhism to North America? Buddhism not all of Buddhism. We have the Nichiren Buddhism, and do correct me, okay, on this, was brought to the States by a Japanese woman. But if we look at the IMS and that tradition, that was brought by Jewish people. And so Buddhism is nuanced with Jewish culture. Now, I grew up in the UK. Who brought Buddhism to the UK? White Westerners, and Buddhism is nuanced by that culture. And now we are beginning to see the Black, Indigenous, people of color cultures settling more in the West, and actually beginning to reclaim the Dharma.
Yes,
you know, to
absolutely.
begin to reclaim it, not claim it, reclaim it. And we are beginning to reclaim it as ours. So the Dharma is living. If we look at if we look at the Dharma, we see that the first iteration of the Dharma, the Buddha Shakyamuni, well, it was rediscovered. So we have to remember it's rediscovered. So we know that the Dharma existed before Shakyamuni, but then it dies out in India, and it goes to Burma, and it goes to Tibet, and it goes to China, and it looks completely different. Yeah. So culturally, we have to reclaim it. And then if we look at the second wave, King Ashoka, it comes back to India, it dies out, and then we have Dr. Ambedkar, it comes back. So in a way, it's the Dharma is living, and basically, whoever takes the Dharma, whoever gets caught by the Dharma, we have to make it our own. So basically, as Mayoke says, it's our time. Give us it's our leg of the race. It's our leg of the race for big pot communities and for people who identify as women, non-binary, etc.
Right, exactly.
Trans.
Well, there's a concept that we use called Zwihobini, which means to practice according to the customs of the land, unless it violates the basic tenets of Buddhism. And we also have to look at the eternal nature of the Buddha and all we call them Buddhism manifestations of the worlds of the 10 directions, that he's always been here. The teachings have always been here. And as you said, in and out, coming, this whole cycle of birth and all the way to death, even in the teachings. And it's our time to claim it and make it work and make it really live up to everything that the Buddha talked about, to take each other home. In particular, that's why I focus a lot on Sangha, because so many of the cultures where Buddhism has lived for so long are not individualistic, but more communal in nature, really pointing out a deeper understanding of a lived experience of interconnection. Even as some cultures have taken the stance that the nail that stands out gets hammered down, because we're so individualistic in our presentation. But somehow we have to balance that and be able to bring forth all of what we know to be true to create a Dharma that's available to everyone.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for the great things you said. I would just add that I think that we really have to look at how we center on white people, like this idea that Westerners know the purest form of Buddhism, or that they've stripped away the culture, when really we're just imposing our individualistic centered culture on Dharma. And actually Buddhism came to the West with Chinese immigrants, with Japanese immigrants, with Vietnamese people, way before the hippies picked it up, And we tend to act as if we're the white saviors who, oh yes, we're holding the banner of real Buddhism and we don't have cultural constraints. And well, everybody has cultural constraints, so you just have to, examine them and not impose them on others and accept diversity,
Actually,
Sorry, yeah.
The fact that you say that, Ayya, sorry, it's like we call Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, ethnic Buddhism, as if as if there's, you know, we're superior because that is ethnic Buddhism.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I think, you know, in terms of going forward with leadership, we can see so much, you know, we can see that ultimate power corrupts, and that, you know, the patriarchy has developed a real sense of entitlement and therefore corruption. And, you know, to avoid that kind of corruption, we need more, what's the word, like horizontal leadership as groups with accountability and very clear boundaries, not just one individual taking all the power, but leading in groups, which is actually a matriarchal style of leadership, you know, like consensus and discussion, and more people involved in holding power and accountability. That's what I would say. Yeah, I've certainly been impacted by, I think all of you have, by the rampant patriarchy in Buddhism, and especially in Tibetan Buddhism. And that doesn't mean that there's not so many good things, but I sometimes feel so weary of it, you know, and if you stand up and question it, you're suddenly seen as a terrible Buddhist, you know, but it's actually the terrible Buddhists who aren't questioning and who turn their eyes away as this kind of abuse goes on. If somebody has a radio or something on in the background, if they could turn it off, that would be good. Yeah. So on to the next, maybe. Cynthia?
Thank you. I was muted. My voice was silenced. Thank you for that. That was beautifully answered. And I wonder now if we can just quickly talk about interconnection, as you touched on, Mayaki, and that true understanding. I wonder, do you feel Buddhist groups are socially engaged enough and sensitized to social justice issues like sexism and racism?
No. Simply no. One of the things I often encounter, especially from white folks, is that they don't want to deal with the issues of racism in particular, because we're all one race. You know, we're so connected, we're one people, we're one because of the Dharma, without really understanding that if you don't deal with those issues, then there's no way to really be one. If you don't understand what someone's life is about, then how can you support that person on the journey? And same thing with the issues of women, trans people. You know, you often hear that we should not be separate. We should not have safe space for people who are different. You know, I mean, we run the whole gamut of different groups that can meet together and really support each other and help each other walk the journey as Buddhists. And we have to be open to that. And which is why I think if we really understand that each of us has a different journey along the same path. You know, I come across as a biracial woman, and so there's a lot that I can share with other people who are also biracial and female. I'm not going to be able to really understand 100% person who is transgendered. I can empathize, but I can't walk in that person's shoes, just as I can't walk in a gay person's shoes or a cisgendered male's shoes. I can't do that. I can be there. But if we don't acknowledge the value of all of these journeys, of all of these paths, and understand that much like when you have a search and rescue mission, that you have people walking together, 6 feet apart, checking the fields and everything to see if they can find a person. That's how we have to walk through the world, all of us together. Because if I find someone that's, for example, an addict or needs recovery, then I would be happy to send that person to Vimalasara because she has the goods. Just as the same way if, there's something that I have to send to Ayya so that she can help that person. We have to be aware that we are not the end all to be all to everyone, that we have to allow room to reach out to our companions on the journey and allow them to help us help others.
Did anyone else want to, Ayya or Vimalasara, did you want to share on that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. We were talking about do Buddhist groups, are they socially engaged enough?
There are individuals, I'd like to say, I think there are individuals who are socially engaged within Buddhist groups. I think that's really important, and we're seeing this is why it's becoming problematic within the communities, because in a way social justice is becoming an external doorway to liberation. And part of social justice is recognizing those differences, and if you think about it, it's like, look at how many Buddhas and deities there are. There's one for everybody, I mean, even, Kuan Yin. In fact, all of them. When you become a flipping Buddha, you're genderless anyway. It's just that we put a gender on the Buddha. This is the whole thing. When you become a Buddha, you are genderless. Please let me tell you that. Yeah, the prince destroyed all labels, including the label as male. But it's a great question, because I come from a community where you think, well, our community does engage Buddhism, but actually what our communities are, we're very big in India. In fact, we are the one of the biggest Buddhist communities out in India. But actually it could be really seen like missionary type work. I mean, we've done very good work out there, but what's my community doing on their own doorstep? Where's the engaged Buddhism in the US, where we are? Where's the engaged Buddhism in Canada, where I am? Where's the engaged Buddhism in England? What are we doing on our own doorstep? So there is a lot for us to do, but I do want to say that there are individuals who are doing a good job of engaged Buddhism. And for me, I think engaged Buddhism begins with listening. Yes, it begins with listening. So I'll end there.
I would say definitely we're not socially engaged enough. If we compare what Christians do with soup kitchens and helping the homeless, and like there's a church on, obviously it's historically entrenched, but there's a church on every corner. I'm not saying we should go out and convert people, but we could certainly be a lot more engaged than we are. And I've heard mostly kind of more affluent people say things like that if you go out, if you're not meditating enough, if you go out and do things, it's like you're somehow less of a Buddhist. And the idea that, chanting or visualization is not Buddhism, that's ethnic Buddhism. And also just like literally a monk said to me the other day on Facebook when I did a pre-post for this group, he said, you're doing social work and therefore you must be a Christian nun, not a Buddhist one. Maybe you should go to Christianity. And like people are suffering, and if people, that's what I realized when I went to India, if a baby is dying, it doesn't need my chanting, it needs $2 diarrhea medicine that can save its life. First you save their life and then you teach them Dharma. You can't give spiritual sustenance to someone who's starving. It's upaya, skillful means. The vow of Bodhisattva is to help beings according to their needs. So it's patronizing to help to give spiritual platitudes and then do nothing in the real sense for people who live in the relative world. And there's so many tropes that we use, like it's their karma, and we shame people for being angry about really unjust things, where they actually anger is a natural response for an unenlightened being to racism, lynching, which is really what's going on in America with Black lives and the Black men that are being killed. It's just the modern lynching, really. And the way we ignore the poor and the homeless, and the way they don't really get access to spiritual spaces. So we actually absolutely need to respond, not just spiritually, but in a real way. So maybe it's good if we go to the question box now, because I think there are a lot of questions.
Yes, there's lots of questions. There's one from Lee Ann, and she says, the story of the Selk is powerful. Do you see a connection between that story and the story of Queen Yin in the light of fierce compassion?
I actually am not fully versed in the story of Kuan Yin. I know she has many manifestations, and she rides on water, which is like a symbol of equanimity over emotions. And she's a female embodiment of great compassion of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, and like the Sacred Mother.
You're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There are many.
I think the story of the Selkie is about women reclaiming their wild nature. Probably a parallel I would draw more is like the Dakinis, of how they turn up in sanctimonious monks' lives and say, this bookish knowledge you have is useless. Here is the nature of mind, and break apart their intellectual superiority complex. That kind of wild, untamed nature of Dakinis, I would probably more compare to the story of the Selkie and the wildness in every woman. Because I think in spirituality and generally in the lives of women, historically, there has been a lot of men claiming our bodies. And I'm sure BIPOC people have experienced that even worse, of people coming in, dominating, stealing their land, dominating and oppressing their bodies. So the story of the Selkie is about reclaiming your wildness, reclaiming your autonomy, standing up, being fierce, and saying F off when someone is oppressing you, and taking back and being a warrior for justice, I guess. But I guess there's many, compassion can also be gentle and strong according to the need.
Well, actually, can you ask that question one more time?
Sure. The story of the Selk is powerful. Do you see a connection between that story and the story of the Kuan Yin in light of fierce compassion?
The story, I'm not getting the word self or selk. What's the story of
Selkie, sorry, Selkie. Yeah.
So Selkies are women who, they're seals in the ocean. It's a story from West Scotland. And then they...
Oh, your story, the story you was like...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm with you. Connecting the two together. What I would say, my response to that is actually, we need both Kuan Yin and the Darkinis, because Kuan Yin, it said, they who hearken to the cries of the suffering. Okay. And we need that. We need to hearken to the cries of the suffering right now. And actually right now, we need the wrathful energy of the Darkinis, okay? We need the wrathful energy of the Darkinis, because nothing else has worked. And so for me, both is definitely needed right now. I was reminded of Harriet Tubman, who, Harriet Tubman, the freedom fighter from the US. And if you're not familiar with Harriet Tubman, the quickest way to get yourself familiar is to watch the film Harriet. But Harriet managed to free so many slaves. And the story is that she carried a gun, and she would sometimes go to plantations, sneak in there and say, right, are you coming? And of course, some of the Black slaves were frightened of freedom, didn't want the liberation, and they were staying. And she would point the gun at them and say, if you stay, I shoot you, and if you come, you come. She never had to shoot anybody, but that's wrathful energy. The wrathful energy is really needed. And in that wrathful energy is compassion, because really seeing the conflict of this Black person who's totally enslaved, but the fear to leave, the fear to emancipate oneself, you know? So it's not binary, it's not either or. We need all the medicines to emancipate and have liberation.
Absolutely.
And this kind of reminds me of something that happens to women a lot, is that people feel entitled to tone police them. Like, have you noticed how many butt ifs there are on Black Lives Matter pages and on feminist pages or pages about domestic violence? Like, just this endless, if you stand up, there'll be this endless pushback of but from men or from white people. And I feel like part of the wisdom of dakinis is just cutting through that and being okay to say, this, we're not going to take that, you know, this is our time, this is our space, please don't derail it. And, you know, to push that aside, you know, because I do experience so much judgment and trolling and pushback about these issues that I'm so tired of. And I think it's actually part of fierce compassion to just say, no, I'm sorry, you know, no more but ifs.
Yeah, wow. Can I ask a question just on that? I wonder what your responses are to Black Lives Matter when people turn to but all lives matter, and where that kind of nuance has been totally missed. I wonder how you respond compassionately to people with that.
Well, I just have a one-liner for that, really. You know, Black Lives Matter. When Black Lives Matter, all lives will matter.
Yes.
Beautiful.
It's the pure truth.
Jane Wang, she said, I agree that Buddhist institutions need to reflect gender parity and social engagement if we are going to progress on gender equality broadly. However, there are still Buddhist institutions that are hesitant to have these conversations. And what are your suggestions for strategies to engage your Sangha to have these conversations as a layperson?
I can begin with that because my Sangha once upon a time would have been seen as really rad. You know, 30 years ago, it was really rad because we, women ordained women, men ordained men, and we had this single, which was called the single sex principle. And, you know, in a way, we have to remember that historically, in Buddhism, there has been a whole, historically, a gender division, okay? So that's something that we have inherited. And so in a way, for me, it's about change, isn't it? How it, again, it's about change and things changing. And so for my Sangha, it's like now more and more of us are identifying as non-binary, gender fluid, trans. Well, which wing do you go in? Do you go into the men's wing or do you go into the women's wing? No. And this has been a really difficult conversation. So what I say is we have to be willing to go into the difficult conversations. Change isn't going to happen without those difficult conversations. And in a way, really, what we have to remember, those of us who are in those difficult conversations, we're doing it not for us, it's our legacy. We're doing it so that we can leave a legacy for the next generation who comes along. And so in a way, that's for me of I have to be of service. I have to be of service. This isn't about my liberation, okay? I'm not into the Arahant model, and it's got its use, it's got its purpose. But for me, right now, where I'm standing, it's the Bodhisattva model, okay? And I can't. Where is my liberation if Black, Indigenous, people of color people aren't getting that liberation? If trans, non-binary, gender fluid people aren't getting that liberation? And so we have to be willing to step into these difficult communications, and people are going to get upset, and some people may leave, and that white fragility or that heterosexual fragility or whatever that fragility is, it's going to get activated. So what? The Dharma is about learning to be with discomfort. That's our whole practice. Our whole practice is about learning to be with uncertainty, working with uncertainty. Everything changes. Yeah. So really, my strategy is rather stop being a theoretical Buddhist practitioner and be a flipping practitioner. What's the point of calling ourselves a Buddhist and reciting all the suttas and intellectually knowing these things if we aren't actually living it? So
Right.
really the strategy is to begin living the Dharma.
Be the Dharma.
Be the Dharma.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm minded of the story of the Dragon King's daughter, because I was reflecting on what Ayya said earlier about chanting or praying to be reborn as a man. And I had always heard that. But as I grew in our school, I found out that the thinking was very different about that. Was that the Dragon King's daughter, instead, when she presented to the Buddha and gave him her jewel, that was the moment when he accepted that jewel that she achieved awakening. But she had to do it for the slower people in the back, so they would understand that she had achieved her awakening. But she went through the whole process of becoming a man and all of this stuff, and then said, see, didn't I achieve it more quickly than that? But everyone seems to have missed that part where it says, didn't I achieve it more quickly? And the sutras really says and points to the equality of everyone, of all beings. And if we can't practice from that standpoint, then I think we're missing the point. That all of us, every single one, and it doesn't matter who we are, how we show up, we are the Buddha's children, we are valued as such, and all of us are assured of awakening only through the efforts that we make in practice. And as you said, living and being the Dharma.
I would also, sorry, Sensei, do you want to say anything else?
No.
Okay. I would also say that, you know, we can't just be complicit in our apathy, you know, because bad things happen when good people do nothing. In terms of going to centers that are controlled by men, where, like Tibetan Buddhism, most of the centers are run as fundraising outlets for Tibetan lamas who go back and give all their money to male monasteries. Like there's only, the nunneries in India are only 20% of the size of the male monasteries. And Western nuns, Western monastics, and I mean people of any color, I just mean people who are English speaking, probably not traditionally Buddhist. We only have 3 in the West in Tibetan Buddhism, and 2 of those are run by men who are accused of rape. So, like, we have to question, like, we're involved in a Dharma center, who is leading it? And if there is no equal female leadership, we are complicit in patriarchy. You know, and it's so often the case that women actually uphold patriarchy as much as men, that we are blind to, and we also uphold racism and white supremacy. We are ignorant of our own complicit nature in the systems of oppression. So if your center doesn't have people of color, if your center doesn't have poor people, if your center doesn't have women in equal leadership roles, you need to speak to the management about changing that. And if they refuse to change it, probably leave and create something better. Because if the only way that these people who have so much power are going to change is if you leave, if you walk out the door. Otherwise, this very strong feudalistic patriarchy we have in Tibetan Buddhism won't change. And so many people are so surprised that there's all these lamas, you know, unfortunately accused of abuse. I'm not surprised because I know what it's like to be considered nothing, you know, because I'm a woman. And you know, they talk about dakinis, but it's a token. They don't empower women as equal leaders. Although, you know, things are changing, there's still a really long way to go. And the only way we can change that is with our feet. You know, demand equality. They won't give it to you. Power never gives anything to someone with less power. It has to be demanded. It has to be, that's how the civil rights, you know, and the independent from colonizers and all of those things, people had to do nonviolent activism to get those things back. And it's absolutely necessary, in my opinion, because 2,600 years has gone by enough already.
I'm conscious of time. We officially only have 5 minutes, but I'm sure we could probably go over, if that's okay with the three of you lovely ones. Yes,
Could
yes. There's a question. Yes, do you need to go?
Could we just put a time limit on it, because I've been on screen since.
Of course, of course. Let's just do one more question. It's a heavy question, but let's just do one more question, and it's from Patrick. And should we not be organising to dismantle and abolish these legal and social systems rooted in nationalism and imperialism that enable oppression rather than meeting people at the end of the system in a soup kitchen? It's a heavy question.
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. Should we not be organising to dismantle and abolish these legal and social systems rooted in imperialism that enable oppression rather than meeting people at the end of the system in soup kitchens?
Well, my response to that, and it actually activates something that Ayya says, you know, in a good way, that actually it isn't enough just to have a woman or a person of color or a trans person or a non-binary person at the helm, because we're still working within the systemic the institutions that have systemic racism or systemic genderism. And so in a way, I think this is what we're beginning to see, you know, with the in my talk, when I was talking about the destruction of the mythos. This is what happens. The fact that statues are toppling, you know, it's there. They've moved Winston Churchill even in India, you know, like and this is part of the institution. In fact, I talk about the codependency of racism, because we have looked after people's dysfunction. We've made ourselves small so that white people can feel better, you know. So we are beginning, and that does have to happen. There has to be, there definitely has to be a dismantling of institutions. And so how does that happen? I think we have to create our Dharma and make it culturally specific. That's the only way. We have to do it for us. We can't wait for other people to do it for us. They can help us. At the moment, the word ally is becoming a bit old-fashioned, so I won't use that. But so in answer to your question, I really do think that there has to be a dismantling of institutions, but I'm not going to see, I'm not going to see the fruits of that in my lifetime. It's going to take time, but it's happening. It really is happening.
I agree with you, because I would say that we are doing that now, even in the small spaces of the interactions we have with each other. Because first it has to happen within each of us on that individual level, because most of us were taught all of the things all the isms that we have and that we are triggered by, we're taught those things by people we loved and trusted. And so the healing that we're doing for ourselves and helping others to heal themselves is the first step in any venture that's going to be continuous and long lasting. Because if we don't do that, then we'll have people who never understand why it's so important to open their hearts and their minds to the understanding that we all need to be healed of all of the isms that were taught to us, and that we have to see that first before we can actually do anything about anything else.
And look, the other thing that I want to say is the power of technology. The institutions could not control us over the uprisings. They happened all throughout the whole world. You know, people were uprising and saying, yes, you know, the ones who have been oppressed, yes, it's got to stop. The institution couldn't control us. So something is happening, and it's a bit of a koan, because I can remember being in the riots, the last riots that they had in England, and there was this thing of, oh, let's shut down the internet. Wasn't so big, but texting was, and let's shut everything down. And they said no, because we won't know what people are doing. Well, so if the thing is that we know what everybody's doing, but they're too scared to shut it down because they won't know what people are doing. So we are beginning to have some control. We are beginning to dismantle institutions that have had control over us.
Yeah, who would have?
Yeah, sorry, Venerable.
Go ahead.
I also think it's a really good question, Patrick, because a lot of the poverty and stuff we see is a systemic problem. Even the kind of problems we see in India and Africa, although Africa has many different countries, is a result of colonization. But I mean, it's not easy to change massive institutions, and often it's like, I think it's like, I don't know, what is it, like 10% of the world has half the world's money, has as much money as 20% of the I don't know. It's like a very small group of people.
Yeah.
What is it, 80 people have as much money as half the world? Is that an exaggeration? But it's obscene.
No, it's obscene.
Yeah. And it's really hard to change that. What we can, you know, join Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, and we can march in the street. But what we can also do is, at a grassroots level, form a collective of 100 people, make sure everybody has emotional care, enough food, elder care, a friend to visit, and they don't feel alone, and they have backup. That's what something, you know, even a collective of 10 or 20 people in your neighborhood, you know, plan a garden, have a community garden, have days where you come together and share community, go vegetarian. You know, I'm a meat eater myself, but I'm trying to eat less meat. There's so many things we can do at a personal level as well, but for sure we can't solve these problems at a personal level. We have to do it as a group. But I think another thing we have to do, which is really hard as left-wing or progressive people, is we have to engage with the right. We have to talk to those people, because there's a growing polarization. There's a lot of fake news, and people are completely living in a kind of ghettoized in their ideologies. There's echo chambers. So people are going further apart, and we need to engage with those people, which is so hard because often they're quite bigoted. But as, you know, for our own safety level, to engage with them, certainly as white people, we need to use our privilege to raise Black voices and trans voices and poor voices. And that's why we need men as allies. We need men to participate to end patriarchy, because patriarchy is a male problem. And we need white people to engage because racism is a white problem. But yeah, we do need to engage with those people and just, you know, not be completely hostile, but engage in a dialogue so that eventually maybe they'll change, maybe they'll understand how their bigotry impacts people, and there may be people who will never change. But from the grassroots up is a way that I found is quite profound. You know, the charity I started with a few $100s a year and school uniforms for little girls, and now we help 2,000 people a year. Yeah.
Something you said really reminded me of Michael Moore's latest film, documentary. And it was, the narrator said, people aren't really interested in saving the planet, they're interested in saving the way they live.
Yes.
And if we look at that in a way, people really aren't interested in dismantling racism. They want to save the way they live. And this is it. People want to hold on to the way they live, and without having to change, because drastic change has to happen. if these institutions topple and dismantle, change really has to happen.
You know, I wanted to share something about when I first went into the prison system. We were invited in, and I took 2 women with me, 3 women, 3 Black women, and we met a group of white men who wanted to hear about the Dharma. And it wasn't until maybe 2 years down the road that we found out they were all neo-Nazis and white supremacists. We had no clue, even though, I mean, they had the tats. We were pretty naive at the beginning. But through strenuous practice, a significant number of them gave up their leanings towards white supremacy and opened their hearts to 3 women of color, 3 Black women. And so now, and some of them got out and continued their practice. And it really illustrated to me that when you invest in people and you invest your compassion and love for others, that they can change, especially when they see a respect for their lives, because they've never experienced that before. And somehow, whatever they were doing as a white supremacist, or, you know, if they came in when they were 15 to protect themselves by joining a gang, that the Dharma was much more powerful than that for quite a number of them. So we start with the individual, and eventually, as you said, Vimalasara, it's going maybe not in our lifetimes, but it is happening. It is very much happening.
Yeah, that's really.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Because in a way, it's always said that the Buddha was able to give a teaching to anybody, the right teaching, the right medicine, so they can hear it. And so in a way, I'm just left with, how can we as Dharma practitioners make it accessible to the white supremacists?
Yes.
You know, how can we make it accessible to the police? How can we make it accessible to everybody? Because Dharma works. It really does work.
Yeah.
We have the original swastika.
Yes.
Yes, it's a symbol of fertility. It's a symbol of fertility, isn't it? The swastika. That's what I've read, that it's actually a symbol of fertility.
I think it's like to remove obstacles and like a good omen, auspicious omen, you can say. Yeah. You're probably right.
Yeah.
But I think I've heard that white supremacist groups use comradeship, you know, and brotherhood as a way to attract people, like loners. You know, they really go into loners and people who are socially isolated, and they make them feel that they're part of a brotherhood, you know, and these disenfranchised, usually blue collar white men and some women feel perhaps, because they're not getting the American dream, they're not seeing who the real problem is the billionaires. It's not because some immigrants taken their job, it's because their job's been mechanized and passed overseas, and a billionaire has made a deal to take their job away, you know. So yeah, I mean, that sangha, that idea of community, is a big thing, I think, but I'm no expert for sure.
And I want to just remembering, just thinking, we've spoken a lot about North America, UK, and I actually, one of my first jobs was working as an international correspondent covering Aboriginal deaths in custody and Aboriginal land rights. And I had the privilege to live in Yirrkala with the Yolngu people, and that's where I learned the Dharma. You know, somebody asked me, mindfulness is like, you go into those traditional cultures, dream time is mindfulness, but just you know, I just really remember there the polarization of race, and it being that country being built on, you know, Australia was built on Tirra Nullis, unoccupied territory. how do you dismantle that, you know, when it's taught, it's not so much, but taught in the education system, people, you know, and then how do you dismantle the system, the school system that I went through? I went through a system that was saying that I was 13 IQ points inferior to white people, based on the twin studies by Isaac and Burke, you know, which came out of the States, which we later found were confounded. So in a way, we've got to get rid of the lies, because there's a lot of lies. You know, it's one big lie to control people, one big lie, and we have to get rid of these lies, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And just on that, there has been a thread of understanding our history, you know, and in both, all of your three talks, there was certainly a pressing need for us to understand where we come from. Conscious of time and want to be respectful, I think maybe we close here. And Ayya, do you want to like close the container of love in some way? And
so thank you all, Vimalasara and Miyuki Sensei, for your wonderful contribution. I'm sorry if I got the Sensei and Miyuki in the wrong way.
No.
And thanks to Damith from Dharmanet, who has made this event possible as a platform, and to Yoke Magazine and Cynthia for her wonderful moderation. Thanks to all of you for coming, because we can't build beloved community without you.